All right, welcome. In this video, we're going to look at how to take two variables and plot them and make a linear regression. So we're going to have one axis be the duration here, and this is going to be measured in minutes. So I'm just going to include that in the title, and I'll double click here just to give it a little room, and the mood change. So there are a range of 0 changes in mood to +1, +2. There's some decreases as well. But we are going to plot these next to each other. So we want to create a scatter plot for these two things, but we want to make sure that we can see whether or not there's a correlation or not. So we're looking for to display an equation on there, a line of best fit, or more technically called a regression line. And then we want to be able to see how well that line fit. There's something called an R-squared value, which can tell us some information about whether that was a good fit or not. So the first thing I need to do is I need to highlight all the data. So I'm going to highlight, including the titles. And then I'm going to go to Insert Chart. So when we're doing a scatter plot, you don't need to do any other calculations beforehand. But sometimes, depending on how you have things in there, you can get some kind of finicky spreadsheet errors. So just try and be as consistent as you can as you're making these things. So the more practice you get, the less often you'll get these kind of frustrating errors. So we're just going to go to Insert Chart. We'll see if we get a scatter plot by default. We do here. Okay, so we are getting the duration in minutes here on the bottom, which is what I want. I want time on the bottom, and then mood change is showing up here on the left. So that's actually what I want. But you can see here that there is one point way out here. So it might be worth having it kind of an outlier discussion here. What was that point? There was one that was 120 minutes. Okay, so in terms of these time values, there's a lot of clustering around 20, which maybe isn't so great. If you're trying to have a varied amount of time, we don't want quite such a clustering around 20. But that's what's in this data set. But our graph might look better if we eliminated the 120-minute one. I don't know what this activity is, but it seems like the activity normally falls within a range of about 20 minutes to maybe the higher one is 45. The 120 just might be a little too extreme for consistency. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take that one out. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to say that one's an outlier. If we had notes about that gave us more context about what was going on, maybe like some journal notes or something, you might even have extra motivation or extra cause to say that's an outlier. So I just kind of shortened up my data set here, and now the graph looks a little bit more spread out. There's a little bit more room for everything. Our highest duration now is in the 45-minute range. Okay, so that is mostly what we want. We've got the scatter plot. It looks a little bit weird because we've got points all over the place. It's not really a clear, following a path of something increasing or not. So if there is a relationship, we should see with an equation. So what I'm going to do is click on one of the points here. And when you right click, you can get into things like, we'll go into chart axis, for example. Let's get into, or we'll get into series, because I think that's where the information about the equation is. So looking at our mood change here, if you scroll down, there is an option for a trend line. So it'll do a regression for you very quickly. So this is what the line looks like. It does look like there's an increasing trend. And then if we want to find the equation, we need to go down to label. If we change label to use equation, then we'll get a slope. So the slope is 0.418 times x, and the y-intercept is minus 0.276. So I don't care so much about the y-intercept in this context, But the slope is still interesting. It says like for every minute, because X is in minutes, for every minute you spend doing this activity, your mood goes up by like 0.4 of a marker. But we don't know how accurate that is yet. So we're gonna use R squared. So show R squared. And this gives us an idea of how much of a correlation there is here. The maximum value is 1. The minimum value is 0. So on that spectrum, we're at like 0.1. So that's actually not much of a correlation here. So even though our equation says that every minute spent gives us an increase in mood of about 0.04, or maybe we'll say every 10 minutes then would give us point increase of about half a mood point. It's just not really reliable because the R squared value is so low. So this might happen with your data set as well. If you find that your mood wasn't affected by your activity, then there's probably something to dig in there. Like what happened? Provide some of that context. Why do you think your mood wasn't affected? That goes against your hypothesis. Sorry. You thought doing this activity would positively affect your mood, but maybe it didn't, and that's okay. But let's try and dig into those details and discuss about what maybe happened during the data collection. Are there stuff you can pull from your, if you journaled any of your data points, maybe you can find out what was going on that kind of made this go against your hypothesis. So that's kind of the interesting thing to do after that point. You got a graph, maybe there's a correlation, maybe there's not, but now you need to discuss. And whether it's correlated or not, there's still lots of good things to discuss. And that's why it's good that this is a personal activity for you, because you have a lot of context. You know yourself pretty well at your age. So you should be able to kind of say something interesting about why the data ended up the way it did. Okay. But that is how to get your data into a scatter plot with a line of best fit or a regression line with the kind of correlation coefficient here. Just remember that these are all default titles. I would always look these over and change them as needed. Okay. Make sure your titles are descriptive and things like units are included, so that it just gives more polish to your overall project. Okay, but we'll leave it here at that, and the analysis is the next part.